Jack, did you know there's a creature out there that absolutely loves to feast on human flesh? That's why we're sheep.
Wait, I'm a sheep. Oh
Yeah,
my gosh, I'm a sheep.
You're a sheep.
I thought I was a person.
Yes.
When did this happen?
Well, it happened after we discovered feeding the manticore.
So I'm gonna the manticore's gonna eat me?
No. Manticores feed on people.
Oh, so I'm safe.
So you're safe. You're totally safe.
Well, that's good.
All of you out there in the little white ball, go to patreon.com/feedingthemanticore and discover how you too can be safe.
All you have to do is donate a small fee, and you too can become a sheep. When you donate to our Patreon page, we polymorph you into a sheep so that you can listen to Feeding the Manticore safely as a sheep.
If you want to know about the Manticore, listen to Metagamers Anonymous. We'll talk about it. If you want to know how the Manticore was created, listen to The Wonderful World of Creation. We talk about it. If you want to know how we polymorphed you into a sheep, listen to Manual of Miscellaneous Magics, because we'll talk about it. Happy listening.
Well, Jack, how's it going?
It's going good, Joster. How about yourself?
Doing good. Welcome, listeners, to
Metagamers Anonymous.
Metagamers Anonymous, yes. Welcome back to Metagamers Anonymous. This is episode 2. We're still ironing out the details, but yeah, we're excited. We're going to keep this going. So, last week we talked about some encounters, kind of introduced the podcast in general. We talked about encounters, what makes an encounter. We talked about ability checks, talked about the barbarian, and we talked about making a villain. That was our big topic last week, was making a villain.
That was an awesome topic. I really enjoyed talking about making villains. In fact, I used some of that to plan my campaign that I'm going to be running tonight.
Yes. Yeah. We're actually getting ready to run Jack's game. Well, he's getting ready to run. I'm getting ready to.
I'm getting ready to beat the crap out of the players. Mwahaha.
He doesn't really have to try very hard to beat the crap out of my particular character. I run a warlock in his game, and my warlock has extremely low dexterity. And so basically all he has to do is run a string of tripwires. I will trip one of them, if not all of them. So.
Totally.
But the rest of the characters are a little bit more robust. So.
All right, well, let's just dive right into it. I think the rule that we're going to talk about tonight is I think we're going to continue talking about ability checks.
Yep.
Talking about how they work and when you make certain checks and things like that.
Yep. Last week we talked about basically how you get your ability scores and what they all mean. Right, so strength, dexterity, what those translate into in real life. So tonight what we're going to talk about is how you use them in the world of D&D.
Right.
So, if you look on page 174 of the Player's Handbook, it has a main category entitled Ability Checks. Underneath that, it has a table, and I'm actually going to ask Jack to talk a little bit about what that table means.
So, basically, that table is typical difficulty classes table. And basically what that means is in the world of D&D, you come across tasks that you have to complete. And those tasks are going to have a difficulty class. They're gonna either be very easy all the way up to nearly impossible. And depending on how difficult the thing is that your players are trying to accomplish, depends on, what it is that they're trying to accomplish, and then the way that they accomplish that is they make ability checks. So if something is very easy, the difficulty class is 5. And then if it's nearly impossible, the difficulty class is 30. And that would be nearly impossible because most of the time, characters don't have a ton of pluses to their ability scores or their skills or, whatever they're using.
So one important thing with that, what those numbers translate into is when the character does an ability check, they roll a d20, they add any modifiers that are necessary. Like, for
Correct.
example, if my warlock is investigating something, if it is well hidden, it would be, a medium to hard task.
Right.
So he has high intelligence, he has proficiency in investigation. So if you set that task as hard, right?
Right.
With his current proficiency, since he's only level 3, he gets 8 plus, or no, not plus 8, plus 6 to his DC, his D20 roll.
Okay.
So he would have to roll, if it was a hard task, he would have to roll a bare minimum of 14.
14. Yep.
Because once he adds his modifiers, then he beats the 20 DC.
Right. Or if, for another example, if you've got a door that your players are trying to get through, and that door is locked, depending on how well the lock is made, and, this is kind of just figured in your head, the rogue will have to make an open locks difficulty check, and depending on, how well the lock is made, what kind of lock it is, depends on how hard it is for the rogue to open that specific lock.
Right. And so the other thing with these ability checks, and we're going to get into what the individual checks are used for, but real quick before we get into that, you can have a task where the players can just try to do that task, and it's a very difficult task. So, it has a DC of 25. Very hard.
Right.
However, they may be able to break up the task in order to make it easier.
Correct.
So let's get into the actual checks, and let's talk about what each of these ability checks will be used for. Before we get into that, there is also a section in here, and I strongly recommend you read it. It's contests. When one person is attempting to do something and another person is attempting to contradict that person. A contest is anything between 2 or more people, but it does not always constitute the same check. For example, if one player is attempting to deceive another player, they roll a contest. One is trying to perceive,
which is an insight check.
Yeah, and one is trying to deceive,
which is a deception check.
So that is an important thing to remember when you're doing a contest, when you're doing 2 or more people rolling against each other. Be aware of what each one is doing. In a grapple, it's both strength, but there's a lot more to contests than just grappling.
Right.
So, strength. Let's talk about strength. What are some of the ability checks with strength?
Well, it only has one skill check that uses strength, and that's athletics. So that's like climbing, running would be an athletic type thing. Strength can also kind of encompass endurance. Yep. In some RPGs, they actually have a whole separate ability that focuses on endurance. Mm-hmm. But in D&D, strength kind of encompasses your endurance.
Yeah. Strength and sometimes constitution also falls into that category. But
right, yeah. For like holding your breath, you'd probably roll a constitution check, not so much a strength check. Yeah. But for something like running, it might be a strength check to see if you can run fast enough or far enough. Mm-hmm. Climbing a wall is going to be a strength check. Jumping a distance is going to be a strength check to see if you can jump hard enough to get far enough over the chasm or whatever you're jumping across, or jumping up onto, or whatever.
So the athletics check is used for anything regarding your character pushing the limits of their strength.
Right.
However, there are also standard strength checks, and it gives some examples here. Forcing open a stuck, locked, or barred door. That's a straight strength check. That's not an athletics check.
Right.
It's just strength.
So you don't get the bonus that you would get if you are proficient with athletics or whatever. Right.
You just use the modifier from your strength.
Right.
Keeping a boulder from rolling. If it's a large boulder, it's going to be a straight strength check.
Right.
Not an athletics check.
Now, one thing to keep in mind is, and I do this sometimes, there's no official rule on this, but this is just fun to have your players do. Like, let's say a player is trying to pole vault over a wall with a large, long pole. So I make them make an athletics check and a dexterity acrobatics check, and if they fail either of them, they don't succeed. Because in my opinion, it takes strength to be able to physically, pole vault yourself over a wall, but it also takes acrobatics because you've got to be dexterous and be able to stick the pole exactly where it needs to go and things like that.
So yeah, that's very true. There are some checks that take multiple types of checks, and so that's another thing to be aware of when you're creating these encounters, when you're doing these checks. Dexterity. Let's talk about dexterity. So dexterity, we've already kind of hit on this. Acrobatics is dexterity. The reason acrobatics does not use strength is because you're not physically pushing your limits. You're bending, you're twisting, you're altering your body, and that's a dexterous movement.
Right.
But here's a question: why is sleight of hand under dexterity?
Because if you think about it, you have to have very dexterous fingers and joints to be able to, for example, perform, if you're trying to pay for an object in a item shop and you want to hide some coins to only make it look like you've given him the right amount, but you've actually slipped some of the coins up under your sleeve or whatever to not give him the right amount. Or if you are trying to lift a bag of money off of someone's belt, you need to be able to have very steady hands to be able to do these kinds of tasks.
A perfect example of dexterity saving throws and dexterity checks is Captain Jack Sparrow. Yes. Because, and you can see that in everything that he does, he is not a physically strong person.
Right.
The character in the movie is not physically strong. He moves around a lot. He waves around a lot. But with regards to sleight of hand, as you were describing that, the way that you were moving your hands, what I saw was when he grabs the gold out of the cursed chest and he's dropping them back in, and he has that single coin left and he just slowly pushes it in his sleeve and then waves his hand as though it is empty. That's a dexterity check.
Yes, very much so.
Stealth is very obviously a dexterity check.
Once again, you have to be able to, move your feet in such a way that they are, heel to toe, so that they don't make a lot of noise. Which, if you've ever tried to be stealthy in the woods, or if you've gone hunting or tried to sneak around, moving heel to toe is not an easy task. Nope. And especially if you're trying to do it quietly, it's you got to have some dexterity. It's tough.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Some other dexterity checks that it actually talks about in the player's handbook is picking a lock. I always put that under sleight of hand. Simply because, if it is a rogue, they would be proficient in it. So any character can pick a lock. If they're a rogue, I would give them proficiency with it. But otherwise, it's just a straight dexterity check.
Right.
Wriggling free from bonds, obviously, dexterity check. If you've ever tried that, there's no strength involved. The harder you pull, the tighter things get, and you just get into a whole mess of things. So you got to be careful. You got to be dexterous to be able to do that.
Correct.
Some weapons, like I believe the rapier, is
a finesse weapon.
Yeah. So you can use either strength or dexterity, and that, once again, I really like Pirates of the Caribbean for this example, for this concept, because you have Jack, who is very precise with the way that he uses his sword.
Correct, yes.
And then you have other characters which are just wildly swinging weapons around.
Just brute strength. They're just, hammer to anvil, just coming down hard.
And there's a reason that some weapons are strength only, and a reason that some weapons are finesse. And the reason for that is it doesn't matter how dexterous you are. You're not going to fence with a great axe. It doesn't work.
Right. There is no parry, riposte.
Yeah, no, there's just wildly swinging.
If you ever try to parry with a great axe, that would be an interesting feat to see.
So, here's a question. Why is armor class under dexterity and not strength? And this is actually something that I thought a lot about. And I have an answer, but I just wanted your perspective on it.
Armor, depending on what it's made out of, you can move more easily in some armor, and in some armor you can't.
Yep. So with leather armor, for example, leather armor has a armor class of 11, and then you add your dexterity modifier. With full plate mail, it is 18.
18 armor class. You get no dex modifier added.
Yeah.
Because you can't really move around very well.
Yeah. Once again, going back to Captain Jack Sparrow, he was very good at dodging weapons. He was very good at moving around the battlefield, staying out of harm's way. So that's
in fact, I would say he has a very high dexterity score, and because he really doesn't really wear armor. He pretty much just wears clothes.
Yeah, pretty much. When we do our pirate campaign, I want to make either I want to make a rogue or a bard, but be as close to Captain Jack Sparrow as possible.
Yeah.
It's going to have to be a bard, because then I get mocking, what is it? Vicious mockery.
Right.
That's what it is.
There you go.
And he uses that all the time.
Yes, he does.
Constitution. We talked a little bit about Constitution when we were back in Strength.
Right.
What does a Constitution check encompass?
Well, it says here that it measures the health, stamina, and vital force of a player. So when you roll for your hit points, you get to add your Constitution modifier. It's how healthy of a player you are. Once again, it measures stamina. So something like holding your breath. How long can you hold your breath? Would be a Constitution check.
Yep. If you're really particular and if you really track things, Constitution checks will also determine how long you can survive without food or water.
Right. I don't typically, in my campaigns, deal with much of the players having to eat or drink. I just assume that they do it when they go into a town or when they take a long rest.
However, for our Saturday campaign, we're going to be tracking all that stuff.
Oh, that should be fun.
Yeah, because I'm the more I've gotten into these rules, I want to check this. So we're going to be assigning weights to inventory that we're carrying.
Nice.
When we reach the point where we're carrying too much, you become encumbered. Your speed halves.
Wow.
Stuff like that. So I think what we'll do is we'll leave the rest of the checks for next episode.
Okay.
So we're going to go ahead and move forward.
We're going to move into our class that we're going to be discussing tonight, and moving right along from Barbarian, we go right into Bard, which I don't know a lot about because I've actually never played a Bard because it's just not my bag. Me personally, I'm not a very musically inclined person, so I tend to shy away from playing the Bard because I don't feel that I would play it and give it justice, so I typically don't play it at all.
Yep. So the interesting thing with the Bard, I'm actually going to read just a couple things out of the main introduction here. This is an example of a Bard. So, humming as she traces her fingers over an ancient monument in a long-forgotten rune, a half-elf in rugged leathers finds knowledge springing into her mind, conjured forth by the magic of her song. This perfectly illustrates what a bard is.
Right.
So, wizards gain their knowledge by study.
Right.
Clerics gain their knowledge by their deity. Clerics and paladins, actually.
Right.
Druids gain their magic by nature.
Right.
Bards get their magic from music, entertainment.
Right. It's really quite interesting.
To play a bard effectively, from a role-playing standpoint, playing a bard is actually very difficult because you not only have to be in character, but your bard also is in character.
Right.
So your bard, even though they may be going through different emotions, even though, in character they may be going through certain things, their magic comes from the fact that they keep themselves in character.
Correct.
So from a role-playing standpoint, bards are very interesting to play. Let's go into the quick build real quick, just to kind of create a foundation.
Okay. So it says in the quick build that you can make a bard quickly by following these suggestions. First, charisma should be your highest ability score, which actually makes a lot of sense because bards are performers. They are musicians. They like to sometimes they like to do like magic tricks and things of that nature. Performing in any way, you need a high charisma. You need people to like you and to generally smile when you walk in the room.
Yep.
So
comparing the bard to the warlock, which is another one that draws its power from charisma, the warlock has high charisma and gains power from its charisma because of the way that it performs for its
patron.
Yeah.
Right.
The bard gains the power from how it performs for everybody.
Right.
So, a lot larger stage there.
Right. And then it's followed by a high dexterity.
The bard is one of these characters that it's basically the Jack Sparrow of the world, of the D&D world. Having a high dexterity allows the bard to get in close and deal massive amounts of damage.
Okay.
And then get out.
Right. Okay. All
right.
So,
they don't wear full plate mail.
Right. Obviously, they wear like lighter armors.
Yeah. Exactly. So a lot of what they do is rush in, do damage, rush out.
Okay.
They do a lot of melee attacks, but they also have spells at their disposal. So it's really an interesting character to play for the fact that they really do, they combine a sorcerer with a rogue. Now, as always, you don't actually have to follow the book because if you're looking at the bardic colleges, you have the College of Lore. Right? College of Lore is basically focusing on magic. It's focusing on creating a character that can do more long-range damage.
Okay.
So, for example, cutting words. At 3rd level, you learn how to use your wit to distract, confuse, and otherwise sap the confidence and competence of others. When a creature that you can see within 60 feet of you makes an attack roll, an ability check, or a damage roll, you can use your reaction to expend one of your uses of Bardic Inspiration, subtracting the Bardic Inspiration die roll from that creature's roll. That is a ranged thing. Basically, you're there to control the battlefield.
Right.
And bards are surprisingly good at that. It's not so much crowd control. Like the warlock is pretty good at crowd control. So when a warlock uses dissonant whispers, it forces the enemy to run away from them.
Right.
That's crowd control. The bard doesn't use crowd control. He basically just insults people so much that they just can't do anything right.
Like Jack Sparrow, he throws so many insults out there that it just befuddles people, and they're just like, "But I hate you."
Yes, exactly. And then on the other side, he's got where he shoots the rope, and grabs on and slings over to the other ship.
Right.
And the guys are just standing there like, that's got to be the best pirate I've ever seen. So that is why I think that he's a bard.
Right, yeah.
However, as with most classes, you can also go with the combat side of things. So College of Valor is more up-close combat oriented.
Right.
For example, you have extra attack at level 6, where you can attack again as long as you attack the first time.
Right.
Battle magic at level 14. So this is another one of those characters that you can do anything you want, and it works. But you actually mentioned something that I wanted to talk about, because I saw a bard that used this so effectively. Vicious Mockery is one of the things that the bard gets in their cantrips.
Okay.
It's a cantrip where you literally insult people or creatures. And if the creature can hear you, it doesn't have to understand you. It just knows that you're attacking it viciously with your words. And it does damage.
That's crazy.
So that literally encompasses what a bard is. I saw a Facebook post, a long time ago, that basically said, wizards say that they gain their magic through, I studied extensively and I learned how to use magic. Sorcerers, I was born to magic. Clerics, I worship a deity and he grants me magic.
Right.
Bard, well, I was making a joke. I was insulting someone and they just died.
This almost makes me want to try a bard the next time I play in a campaign.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So that's a little bit of the bard. I strongly encourage making one. They're really fun. But we're going to go ahead and move forward. We are going to talk more about encounters, diversifying encounters. Some of the sample objectives that are given here, I'm just going to run through a list real quick, and then we're going to go back and we're going to examine them. So making peace is the first example. One of the other examples is retrieving an object, sneaking in, stopping a ritual, or running a gauntlet. Those are just some of the examples, but we're going to go back and we're going to talk about the individual ones and how you can make them unique.
Right. Well, which one should we talk about first, Joster?
Well, I mean, making peace is pretty self-explanatory, but it's also really interesting the way that can work, because when you're talking about making peace, you're talking about two sides of a conflict.
Right.
So the reason that becomes such an interesting encounter is because the players just can't go in and say, okay, well, you guys need to sit down and talk, and that's it. The players need to understand both sides of the conflict, because
right.
I mean, they may draw these two sides into the same room, and then suddenly one of them is killing the other.
Well, I think a key thing that you're going to need to resolve an encounter like this is a player with a high charisma, mm-hmm. because people with high charismas can, persuade people to sit down and talk to one another, or they can use their charisma to incite this peace between these two parties.
Yep. So, for example, in my last campaign, Jack actually was part of. He was in an encounter like this where there was a storm giant and there was a city of dwarves, and they were in the same general area. some of the dwarven army would go out when they were on their free time, and they would go up and they would hunt the giant. And the giant would kill them because it's a giant, they're dwarves. That's the way it worked.
Right.
They were going into his home. So naturally this created a warlike situation, but the little caveat, the interesting caveat with this is the people that went up to fight the giant were not under the command of the general. So they were going up, they were dying, their bodies were being found outside this cave. So naturally, both sides, both the giant and the general, thought the other side was hostile.
Right.
So the giant didn't come down to the dwarves, and the dwarves, the dwarven general, didn't go up to the giant. So they just never talked about it. They never discussed why this is happening.
The giant just assumed that this town of dwarves hated it and wanted it to die. Mm-hmm. And then this town of dwarves just assumed that the giant was a hostile force randomly killing its troops whenever
they walked by.
Tickled his fancy.
Yeah.
You know.
So, because this was a simple misunderstanding, and because Jack understood both sides, it turned it into a very simple negotiation where he led the general out to where the giant was waiting, but he had the general hang back, and he went up to the giant and he says, okay, so here's the situation. The general has not been promoting this activity. He's given strict orders that they're not to go up there. But people have been ignoring it, and those are the people that have been going into your cave, and thus all of this conflict was resolved simply by having the two sit down and come to an agreement.
Right.
It's not always going to be like that.
No, sometimes it's vastly more difficult and intricate.
Sometimes you're going to have situations where the two sides know full well why they're fighting, and sometimes there won't be a solution. And sometimes you'll get your characters to the point when people play D&D, they always assume that there's a solution. Sometimes there isn't, and that's okay. Sometimes the solution is for the players to just back off and pick a side.
Right, and then the solution becomes killing the opposing army or leader or whatever.
So let's go actually into, because that leads right into this, take out a single target.
Right.
That's an encounter. And a battle, a full-on battle between two armies can be ended by taking out a single target.
The leader or the king or whoever's controlling the other army. Because if you take out the commander of an army, that does a couple of different things. One thing is it causes the army to be confused and to not really know what to do because now it has no one leading it.
Yep. Or it can cause division when, suddenly we don't have this one leader. We have these 5 leaders who have different ideas.
That, or it could just cause the army to turn and run because now their morale has dropped because their leader's been killed, and they're just like, well, screw this, like, bye, Felicia, so to speak.
Exactly.
They're like, well, the leader's dead. The reason we were fighting is gone.
Yep.
We don't want to die for nothing, so peace.
Yep. And as a D&D group of 4 to 6 people, or in our case 10 to 40, it seems like.
Sometimes it does seem like we have 40 players. It's so crazy.
This is an ideal situation. Like we can't take on an entire army at level 4. However, we can go in and we can kill a commander.
Right.
So that's why this particular encounter is listed in the book, take out a single target. Because sometimes you'll have to fight through guards, and there'll be 2 or 3 of them, or a small group of them, and that's handleable. But the point is, you're not taking on the army, you're just taking out this one key opponent. Let's go on to a couple of these I find really interesting, and I'm trying to decide. I think I want to go over running a gauntlet.
Yeah, that's the one I was looking at.
Yeah.
Running a gauntlet is so much fun. I've done that as a DM, and I've played in that type of an encounter as a player, and they're just so much fun.
One thing with running a gauntlet, the way that gauntlets are designed, it's really fast paced.
Right.
There are points at which you can pause and kind of catch your breath for a minute, but usually not very many, if any at all. So, with a group of more than 8 players, that's really going to bog down gameplay.
Yes.
I wouldn't recommend running a gauntlet with that many players, but I'm going to try it at some point just to see how it works.
Sure.
But you've got to keep strict control of the game the entire time you're doing it.
Yeah, typically running a gauntlet is best if you have like 4 to 6 players.
Yeah. So,
those usually run really smoothly.
let's talk for a moment about what kind of gauntlets you've had.
So one type of gauntlet that I've had was, and it talks about this in the DM guide, is a time limit adds a complication, and so basically, they found themselves in a hallway, and there was a door at the end of the hallway slowly closing that they had to get through. Yep. And there were 4 or 5 monsters. Now, they weren't very high level monsters because it does need to happen rather quickly. But basically, I determined that the door was going to completely shut after 10 rounds.
Right.
So they had 10 rounds to defeat, 4 monsters, 5 monsters, something like that. Of somewhat low level, who were standing, staggered in this hallway, preventing them from just bolting through to the other side of the door. Yeah. That's an interesting gauntlet.
An interesting caveat with that kind of situation is you have the door closing, but if you have, and I've seen this, if you have a ceiling that is lowering,
right,
it makes the gauntlet really interesting because in addition to all of these things that they have to go through,
they're also going to possibly get crushed.
Yeah, they could possibly get crushed, but also as they're going, if they wait too long, everything becomes difficult terrain.
Right.
Because they're having to crouch down, they're having to go underneath stuff.
Maybe even having to go prone depending on, how long it exactly takes.
Yep. So that reduces their speed, and suddenly it makes it much more intense, and the players start going into like desperation mode to try and get out, which is what you would do in real life if you were in a situation like this.
Right.
So
I think of the trash compactor in Star Wars.
Yep.
When the walls start closing in, the Princess and Han and Luke and Chewbacca start like freaking out, and Leia's like, try to brace it with something, and Han's like, I'm trying to. Yep. So they just start panicking.
And the thing is running a gauntlet, you can actually combine this with other encounters. So, for example, running a gauntlet can be combined with stopping a ritual.
Right, yes.
Where they've barricaded themselves in this place, and anybody who walks in triggers a trap that starts off, this ceiling on the outer ring to lower, or the doors to close, or whatever. But if you don't stop this ritual, guess what? Everybody dies. So you have a time limit that you have to go in. You have all these obstacles that you have to go through, whether it be monsters, whether it be a series of traps. Traps are really fun in gauntlets. There's a lot that you can do with traps. You can have the swinging slides. You can have fire coming out of the walls. All sorts of fun stuff. Gauntlets are one of the most versatile type of encounters because you can make them anything.
Right.
Just make sure that you maintain control of the game while you're playing them.
Yeah, so these encounters are really fun that they give you. And like I said, or like we said, you can homebrew them and kind of diversify them in any way you want. It basically just gives you the key points to run the encounter, and then it's up to you to use your imagination and just kind of go with it.
Yep. So we're going to go ahead and move forward because we've got a very interesting and particularly unique topic for our random topic of the day. I'm starting a campaign on Saturday, and Jack has decided to make a character out of the Volo's Guide. So,
actually, I made 2 characters out of the Volo's Guide because Joster here informed me that the risk of death is highly probable in this campaign. So I made one that I'm going to start out playing, and that is a Tabaxi rogue, which I could talk all day on because he's just super fun. But my backup character is a monstrous race called a Yuanti. And it's a race of snake people. And that's what our 30-minute random topic is going to be on today, because they're just so much fun to talk about. And in the Volo's Guide, it goes well in depth about these monsters.
Now, one of the interesting things, and I actually don't know a whole lot about these, but one of the things that I found really interesting about them is, like, you have the lizard folk, you have the dragonborn, you have the tieflings, you have the Azimir. That these are what these characters are.
Right.
These are what the races are. With these characters, with this particular race, they were actually, like, magically transformed into this particular group?
Yes, it was gods that gathered human beings and transformed human beings into these serpent creatures. And it talks about, in one of the sections, one race, many forms. Mm-hmm. So actually, the Yuanti... there are different levels of Yuanti. Some are straight up giant snakes. Mm-hmm. Some of them have like a snake body with and a snake head, but then they have 2 arms like a man. Mm-hmm. Some of them take on a more human form, but have just certain features of a snake.
Yep.
So, and depending on which type of creature you are, depends on your level of devotion to the snake gods. The Yuanti purebloods are the ones that take on a more human form. Like they may have snake eyes, or they may have fangs, or they may have just like a certain part of their body covered in scales. Those are actually humans who have chosen to take on these forms and to do certain tasks for the Yuanti gods, and their aspiration is to become more snake-like.
Yep. Now, in the Volo's Guide, I believe only the purebloods are considered playable characters.
That's correct.
However, if you're the DM, it's your world. Kind of
right.
Do what you want. If you're a player, talk to your DM. See if they'll allow variances on that.
Right. See if they'll let you play maybe the actual one that's a not a snake, but it has like the head and the body of a snake, but then it has the 2 arms of the human.
Because that would create some interesting caveats. And how would you interact with townsfolk?
Yeah, when you just strolled into a town, you're a giant snake with 2 arms. Like, they're not going to probably be the most friendliest towards you. Or they may even just turn and, like, summon the guard and, like, attack you.
Yep, exactly. However, if you go into a city where the Yuanti is in control...
Right.
You're welcomed, and none of the rest of your party is. So.
Right. Because Yuanti are naturally evil characters. They typically are neutral evil because Yuanti don't deal with emotion. They are more emotionless creatures. So the ideals of law and chaos don't really compute with them. They just know they deal mostly with good and evil, and they're typically, because of the gods that they worship, they are evil creatures.
So they're kind of like the lizard folk in that aspect, where they act outside of normal civilization.
Right.
However, lizard folk, I believe, are true neutral, where they won't necessarily seek to kill things just because.
Right.
But they also aren't bothered by it, and they openly accept cannibalism. Whereas with the Yuan-ti, they will seek to kill people because that's part of their culture.
Right. Yeah. They typically don't like other races. They don't get along well with really anyone.
They don't play well with others.
That is very true. And so the different types of Yuan-ti that you have are the Yuan-ti. I'm not actually sure how you would pronounce that.
Anathemas.
The Yuan-ti anathemas. They're exceedingly rare, and the anathemas is what a pureblood aspires to become. They look much like abominations. They have clawed hands. Some of them have multiple heads, but they are a more snake-like version of the Yuan-ti. Then you have Yuan-ti Malisons. They are more snake-like, but they also have human features as well. The Yuan-ti Pureblood is probably the thing that I'm going to spend the most time on, because that is actually what is deemed a playable class by players. They are the most numerous of the Yuan-ti. Purebloods are also the most human-like, exhibiting one or two snake-like features, such as the slitted pupils, or, like I said, the patches of scales on the skin. In Yuan-ti cities, purebloods are treated fairly, but live in an environment where their wants and needs are eclipsed by those of the Malisons and the abominations. So the Malisons and the anathemas are definitely the more, for lack of a better term, royal versions of the Yuan-ti. They are higher up on the
cultural food chain.
Right, yes, the cultural food chain. So, because purebloods can easily pass as humans, their most important function is as agents of the Yuan-ti in the outside world, which is how when I created my Yuan-ti pureblood, I created him as a warlock because I really wanted to play a warlock. I think that class is interesting and fun. Also, my background, I took the criminal background and used the variant as a spy. So my plan, if I get to play this Yuan-ti character that I created, is to gather as much information as possible about whatever his superiors want to know about, and then report that information back to the Yuan-ti superiors. Yep. So I plan on using a lot of manipulation, a lot of subterfuge. I plan on trying to be able to disguise myself as much as possible as a human so that I can gain very valuable information and then give it back to the Yuan-ti superiors who, are doing whatever they're doing to take control of a city or to invade something, or, whatever the plan is, and that's going to be completely up to Joster here as how he wants to have that happen. Yep. So, like I said, this is my backup character, so I may not even get to play it, but if I do, it's going to present an interesting challenge for Joster as a DM, which is fun when the players start challenging the DM with things.
All right, so let's get into some of these tables. Let's talk about, because you had mentioned some of the stuff that you were doing with your character.
Right. So it actually gives you lots of tables for the Yuan-ti's physical variations, because they can come in so many different shapes and sizes and forms. It gives you, if you're one of the Yuan-Ti who have a full snake body, it gives you options for a body type, whether it's thick, normal, or sleek. Yuan-Ti humanoids, which is a pureblood. Purebloods take on that humanoid form. It gives you options for skin color. So your skin has the chance of being a different, not a normal color of skin, which can be helpful or hurtful depending on what's going on in the campaign.
Anybody who knows anything about snakes knows that they come literally in any color.
Right. And speaking of any color, it also gives you scale patterns. So you can be striped, or you can be mottled or speckled. And what's so funny is there's a table for tongue color. So your tongue can literally be like orange or red.
Nice.
And then you have eye color, which it has your basic like blues and greens and browns, but then you have the possibility of having like yellow or red eyes. Another one is if you're a Malison Yuan-Ti, it has an arms table. So the way the Malisons work is they don't have arms like a normal human being, but they do have arms. Some of them could have an arm that is a cluster of small snakes. So their arm literally comes out almost like tentacles with a bunch of snake heads at the end of them.
So kind of like a variant on Medusa's hair.
Right, yeah, exactly. Those snakes can still act as fingers and wrap around a sword or wrap around a staff or whatever. So it's still a usable arm, but then it's also a cluster of snakes that can bite or poison or whatever.
I wonder, and this is something that DMs would have to decide, or players would have to talk about with their DMs, but I wonder if that would affect how unarmed strike works. Because, like, if you made that particular character into a monk,
that could be interesting.
I as a DM would probably add a little bit of damage to that, but that's me, and I do a lot of homebrew stuff.
Well, and there's a whole section on unusual abilities that different Yuan-Ti can exhibit. Okay. So it kind of would go into that a little bit.
Yeah, maybe that answers my question.
And then also, so like cluster of small snakes. You can have an arm that's one large snake. So it's just an arm that's a giant snake.
Yep.
Which could also be interesting. Then talking about the Malison, their lower bodies, they have different variations on what their lower body looks like. So, and what's so cool about this race is in the real world, snakes come in all different shapes, sizes, varieties, colors. This really puts it in that way.
Although it is important to point out, snakes generally come in a long, straight body.
That's true. That's why these are abominations and not actual snakes. The Yuan-Ti gods have transformed snakes and people into these abominations.
Right. But you are right in the fact that we had, where I grew up, we had worm snakes, where like the way that the snake was shaped, you couldn't tell the head from the tail.
Right.
It was really interesting. And then you've got copperheads that have a really interesting shaped head, narrow neck, and then expand out into a much larger body.
Right.
Then you have constrictors, which are really massive, long basically rope snakes.
Right.
So, yeah, you're right.
So anyways, the lower body of the Malison could possibly be human legs with a large snake tail, human legs and multiple snake tails, scaly human legs with tails and things like that. Then you come into the pureblood characteristics, which is really fun because if you're playing a pureblood, you like I said in the description of the pureblood, they only exhibit 1 or 2 snake-like characteristics. So that could come in the form of fangs. They may have a forked tongue, patches of scales. They may have the serpent eyes, or things like that. So kind of moving on from that, the Yuan-Ti do have some unusual abilities. Some of them can exude acid slime from their body. Yep. Some of them...
Wait, hang on. Go back to that, because I want to hear more about that.
So it's only the Abomination, the Anathema, or the Malison that are the only ones that can exhibit this ability.
Right.
And as a bonus action, the Yuan-Ti can coat its body in a slimy acid that lasts for 1 minute, or in combat, 6 rounds.
That is awesome.
A creature that touches the Yuan-Ti hits with a melee attack while within 5 feet of it, or is hit by its constrict attack, takes an additional D10 of acid damage. So talking about creating a monk that is like that, if he coats his body in that acid and makes a strike, it could do the acid damage.
That's with a monk, with a level 4, level 5 monk, that's 3 attacks.
Yeah.
That's massive.
That's massive damage, which is typically why these types of Yuan-Ti aren't playable characters, because they're slightly broken. Yeah. But as a DM, you can change rules and kind of dumb that down if you so desire.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't have to make it do as much acid damage, or however you want to do that.
The interesting thing with this, though, is creating a villain. I mean, that is not a creature I would want to fight.
No. That's a nasty villain. Yuan-Ti are a nasty thing if you're going to base your entire campaign around the players having to face Yuan-Ti. If that is the main source of the antagonist portion of your campaign, if the Yuan-Ti are trying to take over a city or invade or do whatever, that can be nasty for the players.
That would be intense.
Some of the Yuan-Ti have chameleon skin, so they get advantage on stealth checks. Another really, really interesting ability that some Yuan-Ti can perform is shed skin once per day. The Yuan-Ti can shed its skin as a bonus action to free itself from a grapple, shackles, or other restraints. If the Yuan-Ti spends 1 minute eating its shed skin, it regains points equal to half its maximum hit point. So they can eat that shed skin and regain health.
That is insane.
Yeah.
Oh my god. That would, think about like a group of random explorers, like human, elf, dwarf,
a group of adventurers.
Yeah. Coming across this thing, and the human is taken on the grappler feat. I played a dwarf, and he was a druid, and he could turn into a bear. He took on the grappler feat, because that's what a lot of what I did was grapple things. Imagine what that would do to a party, to have this bear grappling with this snake person thing, and it just wriggles out of its skin, and when everybody's like trying to figure out what the heck just happened, it turns around and it starts eating its own skin, and that would be terrifying.
Yeah.
Just to see that happen.
It would be creepy, it would be really creepy. But it's kind of to balance that out, is they can only do that once per day.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
but yeah, that's about all the time that we have for today. This is Joster
and Jack.
Join us next week right here at Metagamers Anonymous.
Bye, everybody.